The Bourgeois family's ballroom was drowning in opulence. Crystal chandeliers scattered light across designer gowns and elite cautioned smiles. For Nicole Anderson's, this glittering world had been her landscape since childhood, navigating these gilded rooms alongside Christopher, weaving through expensive crowds at countless stuffy gatherings. The Bourgeois family's ballroom exuded opulence. Just too many crystal droplets in. Tonight, though, something felt different. The sparkle cut like broken glass. Nicole, dear, still the main dish in Christopher's life. Yeah. Mrs. Newman materialized beside her, cheekbones sharp enough to draw blood. His oldest, dearest friend. How utterly charming. The words, well-intentioned and oft-repeated, landed like a series of tiny paper cuts. Oldest friend, dearest friend. A title that felt less like an honor and more like a life sentence. She offered a practiced, polite smile. The one she perfected over years of hiding in plain sight. It's his birthday. Where else would I be? Her gaze, as it always did, found him effortlessly. Christopher Bourgeois was the sun around which this particular universe revolved. Even in a room full of powerful, beautiful people, he commanded attention without seeming to try. He was laughing at something a business associate said, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners. A crystal tumbler of amber liquid held loosely in his hand. At 29, he'd shed the last of his boyish leanness, filling out with a confident strength that made the elegantly tailored tuxedo look like it was born to be worn by him. He was her best friend, her protector against bullies since childhood, the keeper of all her secrets, except the one that mattered most, the one that had taken root in her heart so long ago. She couldn't remember a time it wasn't there. As if, feeling the weight of her stare, Christopher turned. His eyes met hers across the crowded room, and a private, genuine smile replaced his social one. He excused himself and cut a path straight toward her, a force of nature so unique. "There you are," he said, his voice a warm rumble that cut through the chamber music. He slipped an arm around her shoulders, pulling her into a brief, familiar hug. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and honey, uniquely Christopher, wrapped around her a painful comfort. "I was beginning to think you were avoiding me in a room you're currently owning." "Impossible," Nicole said, her voice miraculously steady. He leaned closer, his tone dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "You're the only real person here, Nicole. The rest are just background noise. The endearment, the intimacy of the confession sent a familiar, treacherous hope fluttering in her chest. She squashed it. His effortless possessive affection and her quiet, desperate translation of it into something more. The use of honeyed words will get you everywhere, bourgeois, she teased back, falling into their well-worn rhythm. "It always does," he winked. Then his expression turned mischievous. "So I saw you talking to David Hoskoff earlier. He couldn't take his eyes off you. His family's in shipping. Solid, boring, but solid." Nicole's smile tightened. He was just being polite. Christopher nudged her shoulder. He recognizes a catch when he sees one. "You know, for a woman who devours poetry and believes in soulmates, you have a remarkable talent for scaring off any man who shows a flicker of interest." It was a familiar refrain, his playful, brotherly push for her to find someone to be happy. Each time, it felt like he was gently, unknowingly pushing her away. Maybe I'm just waiting for the right one to be properly brave, she said, looking down at the champagne fruit in her hand. Or maybe you're too busy living in your storybooks to see a real flesh and blood man standing in front of you. He sighed a fond, exasperated sound. I just want you to be happy, Nicole. I want to see you lit up from the inside. You deserve a love that consumes you. The irony was so sharp it stole her breath. You, she screamed silently. It's always been you. You are the love that consumes me. Before she could form a reply, a tinkling of glass silenced the room. Christopher's father, a broader, grayer version of his son, stood at the microphone, calling for a toast. Christopher gave her shoulder a final squeeze. Duty calls. Don't wander off. He moved to join his family, leaving her side feeling abruptly, violently cold. The toast began, a litany of Christopher's achievements and the bright future of Willington Holdings. Nicole tried to focus, to smile in all the right places, but her attention snagged on a figure standing close to the Willington family, a stunning woman in a crimson dress, her hand resting lightly on Christopher's arm. Candace something or other, an Italian with the confidence of a queen, and a smile that promised everything. Nicole had seen her before in society pages, and had a few recent events. But tonight, the proximity was different, intentional. As the toast concluded, the crowd erupted in applause. Christopher, laughing, turned to Candace. He leaned in, saying something that made her throw her head back with a throaty laugh. Then his hand came up, not to remove hers, but to cover it, his fingers lacing, with hers in a gesture that was both casual and profoundly possessive. The world narrowed to that single point. Christoph's large, familiar hand enveloping the woman's slender one. It was a gesture he'd never made with her. Their touches were hugs, shoulder bumps, linked arms, the language of family, of friendship. This was different. This was the language of lovers. The polite smile she had held for hours finally shattered. She felt the fracture deep in her soul. A clean, sharp break. The hope she had so carefully nurtured. The fragile dream she'd clung to for over a decade finally crumbled to dust, leaving a desolate emptiness in its wake. You would never see her that way. She was Nicole, his oldest friend, his confidant, his life, a permanent platonic fixture in the glittering tapestry of his life, while women like Candace would be the stars he reached for, blinking back the hot press of tears. She set her champagne flute on the tray of a passing waiter. The bubbles were suddenly suffocating. She needed air, space, and escaped from the gilded cage of her own making. As she turned to slip away into the crowd, a resolve cold and clear began to form in the ruins of her heart. It was time. Time to stop being the quiet romantic pining from the shadows. Time to stop being in love with Christopher Willington. It was the most terrifying and the most necessary decision she had ever made. And it began with walking away from his birthday party and from the girl she had been, leaving her silent, secret love behind her in the dazzling, heartless light of the ballroom. The silence in Nicole's penthouse was a new deliberate thing. For 3 weeks, it had been filled not with the familiar chime of Christopher's texts or the ring of his late-night calls, but with the determined click of her keyboard and the soft scratch of a paintbrush on canvas. Her art studio, once a neglected sunroom, was now her sanctuary. Canvases leaned against the walls, vibrant with color and emotion, a stark contrast to the muted, polite watercolors she dabbled in before. This was where she was channeling the heartache, transforming it into something tangible and hers. Her phone buzzed on the stool beside her, skittering across the wood. It was the first call this week. His messages had evolved from cheerful, "Hey Nicole, the new Chinese place just opened," to "You're into confused. Did I do something wrong at the party?" You vanished to slightly concerned. "Nicole, just checking in. Call me back." Each ignored notification was a small act of self-preservation. Pulling away was like withdrawing from a potent drug. The withdrawal was a physical ache, a constant low-grade hum of anxiety that something was missing. But with each passing day, the ache lessened just a fraction, replaced by a fragile sense of self-reliance. She was focusing on her career. The small online gallery that had been her side project was now her primary focus. She was sourcing new artists, building a marketing plan, and most importantly, creating her own collection. It was terrifying and exhilarating. Her phone buzzed again. Not a call, but a text. "Christopher, okay, you're busy. I get it, but I'm coming over. We need to talk." 700 p.m. a free zone of panic shot through her. He was invading her sanctuary. This was her space, the one place he hadn't colonized with his larger-than-life presence. She couldn't see him. Not yet. She wasn't strong enough to face those concerned brown eyes and her own treacherous heart. She tried to reply, her fingers shaking. "Count, I have a date." She stared at the words before hitting send. It wasn't entirely a lie. She did have plans, focusing on herself. Christopher was surprised, hearing something for probably the first time. A date. Nicole rarely went on dates. Not exactly. She went on polite, brief outings with men he or her family subtly vetted. Men who were always deemed safe or appropriate. They never lasted. He'd always attributed it to her high standards, her romantic soul that he teasingly told her was waiting for a romantic prince from the fairy tale. He tossed the phone onto his desk, the sharp clatter echoing in the quiet room. The unease that had been alone hung in his veins for weeks, flared into a sharp note in discord. Her distance had been a slow dawning realization. He initially thought she was just busy. Then he'd felt a flicker of annoyance. Was she punishing him for something? For Candace? He'd ended that almost as soon as it began. He'd meant to tell Nicole about it, to laugh it off as another failed attempt his family had architected. But she had been ignoring his calls. He was used to being the center of her world, not in an arrogant way, but in a simple factual one. They were Christopher and Nicole, a single entity. Her quiet presence was the constant against which he measured his chaotic life. She was his everything, his compass, his sanctuary. He told her everything. His fears about the company, his frustrations with his father, his stupid fleeting insecurities. Who was he talking to now? The silence was loud. He stood up, pacing the length of the glass wall. The city sprawled beneath him, a kingdom he was being groomed to rule. and it felt suddenly profoundly lonely. She has a date. The thought was back, insistent. Who was that Hoskoff guy? Some other faceless, suitable man from her social circle. The image of Nicole sitting across a candlelit table from a stranger, offering that soft, genuine smile he thought was reserved for their private conversations, made his stomach clench. It was an unfamiliar sensation, hot and acidic. He recognized it with a jolt of surprise as jealousy, but that was ridiculous. He wanted to get rid of this mystery man and have her to himself. That was it. Or maybe it's protectiveness. He grabbed his phone again, his thumb hovering over her name. He wanted to demand details. Who is he? Where is he taking you? Is he good enough? But he stopped. The tone of her text had been final, a brush-off. For the first time in his life, Nicole was building a wall, and he was on the wrong side of it. The feeling was dumbfounding. Later that evening, as fate would have it, Christopher found himself at the same upscale restaurant he'd suggested to Nicole. Weeks ago, a business dinner unavoidable. He was halfway through speaking when he saw her. Her eyes adorable, as always. She was at a corner table lit by the soft glow of a few candles, and she was smiling and laughing. It wasn't her polite social laugh. It was the fully unmonitored one that made her eyes sparkle, the one that usually felt like something more to him. She was wearing a simple, but yet adorable top and this short skirt, one that drove him thinking. He'd never seen her in it before, and her hair was down, falling in soft waves around her shoulders. She looked radiant, independent, beautiful in a way that was entirely separate from him, and the man across from her was making it happen. He was tall with an easy smile and charm. It wasn't David, it was someone new. As Christopher watched, the man reached across the table, not to take her hand, but to gently straighten the fork beside her plate, his fingers briefly brushing hers. Nicole didn't pull away. She just smiled, a faint blush coloring her cheeks. The hot, acidic feeling erupted in Christopher's chest. White, hot, and undeniable. This wasn't protectiveness. This was a primal possessive fury. He wanted to stride over there, put his hand on the back of her chair, and claim his territory. He wanted to remind that man and everyone in the room that she was his. His what? A cold voice whispered in his mind. His oldest friend. The title suddenly felt flimsy, worthless. It gave him no rights, no claim to that blush, to that unguarded laugh. He was suddenly spunked back. It was all an imagination, one crazy delusion. He must be missing her way too much, too soon. He was suddenly, terrifyingly aware of the void her absence had created. He'd thought he was missing his friend, but no, definitely not a friend. But fantasizing about her now, Nicole and captivating with another man, he realized with a sickening lurch that he might be losing something infinitely more precious, something he had never dared to name. He woke up from the imagination, the conversation of his companions fading into a meaningless scent. The only thing he could hear was the roaring in his own ears, the sound of a world tilting violently on its axis. The once-in-a-year Foundation Gala was the influence of the social season, a night where old money and new influence met, throwing fractured light across haute couture and manufactured smiles at the city's history museum. For the first time in her life, Nicole Anderson's wasn't attending as Christopher Bourgeois other. She arrived with James, the artist she'd been seeing for a while now. His presence was a shield, a concrete outburst of her new independence. She wore a dress of deep cream and velvet, a bold departure from the pale, ethereal gowns she usually favored. It was backless, cut with a confidence that made her feel powerful, not just decorative. Her stepmother had raised an eyebrow, but Nicole had simply smiled. The quiet romantic was learning to wear her strength on the outside. She felt Christopher's presence the moment he entered the room. It was a shift in the atmosphere, a subtle gravitational pull she'd been attuned to since childhood. She didn't need to turn around to know he was there, scanning the crowd, his eyes inevitably finding her. James, sensing the shift, leaned in. "Everything okay?" "Fine," she said, her voice slightly rough. She forced her attention back to him, to his easy smile and uncomplicated company. This was what she wanted, a fresh start, a man who saw her as a woman, not a permanent fixture. But Christopher was a force that refused to be ignored. Damn, he cut through the crowd with a determined grace, his focus solely on her. "Nicole," he said, his voice a low thrum that vibrated deep within her. He nodded at James, a curt, dismissive gesture. "James, is it?" "Christopher Bourgeois." The two men shook hands. A brief territorial display. James, to his credit, held his ground, but he was outmatched. Christopher's power wasn't just in his wealth. It was in the sheer magnetic intensity he was radiating. "You look." Christopher's eyes returned to her, and he seemed to search for the right word, reaccessing her looks before landing on different. "Thank you, Christopher," she said, her tone carefully neutral. "You look the same." It was a subtle barb, and he flinched almost imperceptibly. He was the one who was supposed to be the constant, the unchanging sun. She was the one who had moved. The conversation was stilted, filled with the polite nothings of strangers. Christopher's attention never wavered from her. His questions pointed, probing the surface of her new life and her new relationship. It was an interrogation disguised as small talk. When the orchestra began, a slow, sweeping waltz, he saw his opening. "You'll have to excuse us," Christopher said, his hand already finding the small of her back, his touch searing through the velvet. "The first dance is a family tradition. I and Nicole ought to accept it." It was a lie. There was no such tradition, but it was a claim he could make, a piece of their shared history he could weaponize. Before James could protest, Christopher was guiding her onto the dance floor, his grip firm and undeniable. And then she was in his arms. It was different. The way his hands settled on the bare skin of her back wasn't brotherly. It was possessive. The way he pulled her close so their bodies were almost touching wasn't friendly. It was intimate. The familiar scent of him, sandalwood and dry honey, was now an intoxicant, clouding her hard-won resolve. "You've been avoiding me," he murmured, his voice close to her ear. "I've been busy," she replied, her eyes fixed on the lapel of his tuxedo, afraid to meet his gaze. Busy with him? The question was sharp, laced with a jealousy he no longer bothered to conceal. "That's none of your business, Christopher." She finally looked up, and the intensity in his eyes was a physical blow. You're the one who always told me to find. Someone never meant it. He trailed off his jaw. He spun her, the motion fluid, and practiced. A testament to 1,000 childhood dance lessons in this very museum. I didn't mean for you to disappear. I haven't disappeared. I've just stepped out of your shadow. The words hung between them. He looked stunned, as if the concept had never occurred to him. His shadow was a place of privilege, of safety. He'd never considered it might also be a cage. I don't want you in my shadow, Nicolee, he said, his voice dropping, becoming dangerously soft. I want you right here. His hand tightened on her back, pulling her the final infinite decimal inch until her body was flush against his. She could feel the solid wall of his chest, the beat of his heart, a frantic rhythm against her own. The world dissolved, the music, the crowd, James waiting on the sidelines. There was only the heat of him, the dizzying proximity, and the unspoken current that had always flowed between them now roaring to life. Her breath hitched, her carefully constructed walls crumbled. This was the Christopher she had dreamed of, the one who looked at her not as a friend, but as a woman he desperately wanted. His gaze dropped to her lips, lingering there for a heart-stopping moment. The air crackled with the promise of a kiss, a line they had never, ever crossed. It was the sound of the music ending that shattered the spell. The final note hung in the air, and they sprang apart as if electrocuted. The space between them was suddenly cold, the absence of his touch an ache. People were clapping. The spell was broken. Reality, with all its complications, came crashing back. Christopher stared at her, his chest rising and falling rapidly, his own composure shattered. He looked as shaken as she felt. Nicole, he began, his voice rough, but she couldn't hear it. She couldn't hear his excuses, his confusion. She had seen the truth in his eyes, felt it in his touch, and it terrified her more than his indifference ever had. Without a word, she turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the center of the dance floor, the ghost of her warmth still burning against his palm. The chemistry they had spent a lifetime denying was now Nicolee wire between them, and neither of them knew how to turn off the current. Rain lashed against the panoramic windows of Nicole's penthouse, turning the city lights into a blurred impressionist painting. The storm outside was a pale reflection of the one raging within. He's using you, Nicole. Christopher's voice was low, taut with a frustration that had been building for weeks. He stood by the window, a silhouette of coiled tension, a glass of whiskey forgotten in his hand. He's a struggling artist who just happened to land at Anderson's. Open your eyes. Nicole crossed her arms, her posture rigid. That's rich coming from you. The man who's dated a parade of socialites, whose only talent is spending their family's money. At least James is passionate about something. At least he sees me. Sees you. Christopher turned, his eyes flashing. He sees a patron, a stepping stone. I see you. I've always seen you. No, you haven't. The words tore from her, sharp with so many years of pain. You see the girl you grew up with, the convenient friend who's always there, who never asks for anything, who never demands more. You don't see a woman with a heart that can break with, needs you can't fulfill with a joke or a pat on the head. The air crackled with the force of her confession. It wasn't the whole truth, but it was closer than she had ever dared to come. Christopher stared at her, his anger momentarily doused by the raw hurt in her voice. He took a step toward her, then another, the space between them shrinking with a palpable charge. The rain was the only sound, a frantic drumming against the glass. "You think I don't see you?" he repeated, his voice dropping to a raw whisper. He was close now, so close she could see the stormy confusion in his dark eyes, feel the heat radiating from his body. "You think I haven't noticed every single thing about you since the moment you walked into that gala looking like a dream. I never allowed myself to have." Her breath caught. This was new. This was dangerous. "You're my best friend," she whispered, the words weak, untransparent. "You're not my friend right now," he breathed, his gaze dropping to her lips. "You haven't felt like just my friend for weeks." The world stopped. He was looking at her like she was the only thing that mattered, like she was the answer to a question he'd been afraid to ask. And then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle or questioning. It was impulsive, desperate, dam-breaking. His hands came up to cradle her face, his touch achingly tender in contrast to the fierce possession of his mouth. It was a kiss filled with all the words they'd never spoken. The jealousy, the protectiveness, the deep, terrifying love that had been hiding in plain sight for years. Nicole melted, her hands fisted in the lapels of his vest, holding on as the floor seemed to drop away. This was it, the moment her heart had been waiting for. It was everything, a confession, a claiming, a homecoming, a sob caught in her throat, a release of a lifetime of waiting. But as quickly as it began, it ended. Christopher pulled back as if burned, his breath coming in ragged gasps. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a horror that felt like a physical blow. Her lips were still tingling, her body still humming from his touch. But the look on his face was one of pure, unadulterated panic. "Nicole." He stumbled back, running a hand through his hair. "God, I'm sorry. I shouldn't have. We can't." The words were like shards of ice, freezing the warmth he just ignited. "Can't what? Christopher?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can't lose you," he said, the confession ripped from him. "You're the most important person in my life. If we ruin this," he gestured helplessly between them. "I can't. I'm sorry." He was retreating, building the wall back up, brick by terrified brick. He had given Nicole a glimpse of heaven only to slam the gates shut in her face. She stood overwhelmed, the ghost of his kiss still burning on her lips. She brought her fingers to them, feeling the lingering warmth, a cruel mockery of his rejection. He was afraid to ruin their friendship, but he just had. That kiss had changed everything. It had proven that the love she carried for so long wasn't a one-sided fantasy. It was real, and he was too much of a coward to claim it. "Christopher, we're not done yet. There's a secret I've been hiding from you for way too long now." She pulled him before he could reply. They slipped onto the terrace, where fairy lights tangled through bare branches, and their breath misted in the December cold. Nicole wrapped her arms around herself, her dress doing nothing against the chill. Christopher shrugged out of his jacket without a word, draping it over her shoulders. "You deserve someone extraordinary," he continued, and the moment shattered. Someone who'll give you the epic love story you're always reading about. Not some pretentious artist who, isn't it? Years of frustration crystallized in her voice. I'm your oldest friend, your confidant, the person you call at 2 in the morning when you can't sleep. But the moment someone else looks at me like I'm more than that, you swoop in like some overprotective. Keep quiet. I love you. Christoph, I'm in love with you. I know. I'm so sorry. His thumbs brushed away her tears with devastating gentleness. But I'm here now. I'm here. And I'm telling you that I love you. Not as a friend. As a man loves a woman he wants to spend his life with. I've loved you for as long as I can remember, she said, her voice shaking. So many years of watching you date other women, of being your confidant while my heart broke. Every single time you left with someone else. Yes, I'll give our love a chance. Every chance, because I've been in love with you since before. I even understood what love meant. She placed her hands over his, holding them against her face. Untraceable years of loving you, and a year of trying to convince myself I could stop. The kiss that followed was nothing like the careful, chaste embraces they'd shared over the years. This was desperation and relief, apology and promise. Marcus kissed her like a man who'd been drowning and had finally found air deep and consuming and utterly thorough. It was a deep claiming, a homecoming. It was a promise whispered from his soul to hers, a seal on a love that had been long in the making. Christopher rested his forehead against hers, their breaths mingling. I'm never letting you go again, he vowed. You don't have to. She smiled, her heart so full she thought it might burst. You're stuck with me, but Joyce. He laughed, a sound of genuine, unburdened joy, and pulled her into his arms. The charming protector and the quiet romantic had finally done what they should have. For a love that would define their future as one. Haha, these two souls finally brave enough to claim each other was the greatest work of art they would ever create. If this story touched your heart, remember, sometimes the greatest love stories are the ones we're too afraid to write until fear becomes more painful than courage. Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to join us for more stories that prove love is worth the risk. From yours truly,